Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Swait Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. And the hope is that as you and I hear these stories, we will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to somebody who may seem rather ordinary to themselves, but they are a really cool person. Today, we are going to meet Darrin Swait. Darrin is going to talk about growing up in Nevada, Missouri. And then he's going to talk about how cars were a significant part of his life. And he's going to close out the story of his life by talking about his faith. I encourage you over the next few moments to lean in, to hear Darrin's story, and to imagine and see all the ways that God is weaving his own life into the midst of Darrin's life. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Darrin Swait. Well, Darrin, welcome to Really Cool People.
Thank you.
And let's begin with your story.
My story. Gosh, I don't know what kind of story I might have. It was warm and dark, and then I felt all this pressure, and then this guy pulled on my head, and I saw this bright light. Yeah, that I made that up.
It may have happened like that.
But it did pretty much. Yeah, it pretty much happened that way. And so it was a cold day in November. I don't know. I grew up. I considered it a normal family. Right? It's kind of like probably middle, low income kind of normal family. However we grow up, we consider that normal, right? We don't know that there's other kinds of lives going on.
Right.
But I had a younger brother, and the first time I remember seeing him was in our new car, which was a 69 Chevelle SS396, Hugger orange with a black top. And I remember seeing him. That's the first time I can place him in a spot in my memory, is in that car. And I was probably 5 years old already. So I don't know, we spent a lot of time doing things together, I know, but that for some reason really stuck out in my mind. My mom and dad both grew up in Nevada, Missouri, which is, not too far from here, about an hour and a half, 2 hours from here. And she was in a great big family and of 10, and we were, my family has always been pretty close. I mean, even my mom and dad moved to Kansas City from Nevada, and we came down to Nevada often. I mean, it seemed like every weekend when I was a kid, but I know it wasn't that much. But we'd always come down and see aunts, uncles, cousins, go to grandmother's house, both grandmothers, and which was quite a experience. One grandmother had just a normal house, just like everybody else. And then my dad's mom, she lived on like 2.5 acres in an old house that she lived in for almost her entire life. And it didn't have any running water inside. It didn't have plumbing inside at all. It had kerosene stoves. We had to go out to use the outhouse. And it stayed that way her entire life until she died when she was 84, 85 years old. So that was just grandma's house. You go to grandma's house, you gotta go outside, use the outhouse, and grab a gallon of water that she used to go pick up, or she'd fill her car up with plastic jugs, and have me and my brother Kevin get in the car, and we'd go to the city park and fill all those jugs up with water, and then we'd bring them back and unload them all and bring them in. And that was the water for the week. So it was different, but I'm glad we had that kind of experience. So anyway, I feel like I'm just going to ramble because there's so many things popping into my head. But
you lived in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
So what did your parents do?
My dad he worked. I think when I was born, he was working at a dealership, a car dealership in the parts department, and then he got a job at the Ford plant in Clay Como, and he was there for 40 years. So most of his working life, he was at Ford out in Clay Como. My mom, mostly she didn't work, and I think that was partly due to medical reasons. I mentioned the Chevelle earlier, and the car was just almost brand new. And my brother and I was in the back of the car, and my mom had to pull in to get some cigarettes or milk or something at this little convenience store. And some lady rear-ended us doing about 35 miles an hour and messed the car up pretty bad. My dad had to drive it to work anyway that day, which had to be really difficult. But it gave my mom whiplash. And so she spent, the next several years almost, she ended up having a surgery and had a big scar on her neck. And that turned into drug dependencies. And so, which I think might have been a problem for her anyway to begin with. But now she had, legal reason to, but gosh, this was back in the 60s, early 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so she had quite a few difficulties. But so she was home most of the time. I think there for a while she ended up being a nurse working at a nursing home for a short period of time, but mostly she was at home. So anyway, I went to 4 different schools in kindergarten, and then I think it was 4. Pretty sure it was 4. And then Dad, since he started making better money, we moved to another house, and we lived there for probably, I think, 6 years, and he made enough where he wanted to get a new house. And so we had a house built out on the east end. We lived actually in Independence, suburb of Kansas City. And so moved out on the east end of Kansas City to a brand new house, and left all my friends behind, some of which I still talk to from grade school, which is kind of cool. And so that was kind of odd trying to fit into it's a weird age to try to fit into a new group of people, right? You're just getting to be a teenager and everything going on in your body and trying to fit in with people. Didn't know anybody at the school except for one person. And so it was kind of cool, though, because across the street from us, there was nothing. It was there was nothing over there. It was just land. And it was between our house and the Independence Center. There was nothing, just acres and acres of nothing. And we had motorcycles. And so we would spend our days riding motorcycles. Hours upon hours. In the summer, in the winter, whatever. We was just out riding all the time. And our dog would follow along with us, and we'd go all the way over to where the Independence Center is now. And nobody, said, hey, be back in an hour or whatever. Same way with our bicycles. We lived right in the middle of Independence when we were younger, and we would go out, just like you hear, we would be out forever. They said, well, be home before dark. And we would just ride for hours and go see friends, and we were just free to go wherever we wanted. And we got the motorcycles. And man, that was just a blast, because we just go out there and explore. And whoever owned the land, I never found out who owned it. I never knew, but they never stopped us. And so, yeah, we just go out and explore and have fun on our motorcycles. So that was a lot of fun. And but cars were always a big thing in our life. So when I was a kid, my mom and dad both, when I was like in kindergarten, mom and dad both had cars that they would race. Mom had a 55 Chevy, dad had a 56 Chevy. And the 55 he could drive it on the street, but the 56 he couldn't. And so he would be in the backyard working on it during the day, and sometimes I'd hop inside the car with all the interior would be torn out, and he'd have the open exhaust on there, and it just made a whole bunch of noise. And so we were like little grease monkeys, me and my brother, and just always around the cars and stuff. And my uncle was the same way. So we'd go over to my uncle's house, and he'd have his car that he had, and my cousins and I, we just sit around looking at hot rod magazines, and it's always cars. My uncles also when they lived in Nevada, they all had there was a dirt track there, so all of them would race. And so we'd go to the dirt track and hang around with more cars. And eventually part of my family ended up owning part of the track. So like I said, cars were always part of the deal. We had that Chevelle for 30 years. It stayed in the family for 30 years. It was like a family member. And then, I think probably in my 10th grade, somewhere around there, a guy moved 2 houses down who had a stock car he raced around the United States. And so I'd hang around down there. I ended up becoming part of his pit crew. And we would go up into Michigan and Ohio and into Canada and race. And when I got old enough to drive, I would drive the truck and the trailer and help him get wherever we were going and get back. And then I got older and got a job. And sometimes my dad and I'd say, "Hey, Dad, do you want to go to Nevada tonight to see the races?" And so we'd hop in my little Datsun that I had at the time, and we'd drive all the way down to Nevada, and which was about an hour and a half, watch the races all night long, and then drive all the way back, and get home like at 1:30. So that was a cool thing. And so
one of the things you said, sorry to interrupt, but
no,
you mentioned that your mom had a car. Your mom and your dad both had cars.
Yep, they both drag raced. Yep.
Your mom drag raced.
Yeah.
And then you talked about how your uncles would race, but did any of your aunts also drag race?
No, none of my aunts did. I never thought about that, but none of them did. It was just my mom. My mom was the only one that did.
How did your mom get pulled into drag racing?
I don't know. I guess it was probably just because my dad was so much into it, and I guess it was kind of her circle of friends, right? My dad, his brother, were all into racing, and all of her brothers were, and so she just kind of was. She had a motorcycle. One of the first motorcycles I got was hers. She handed it back down to me. So she was, a country girl, and barefoot out in the country, running around, kind of a tomboyish kind of girl, and.
So who was more adventurous between your parents, your mom or your dad?
Who was more of an interest?
Adventurous.
Oh, adventurous. Probably my mom.
And a risk taker.
Yeah, my mom. I think my dad's kind of risk averse. He'd rather not. He was. Now that he's older, knowing that he's probably going to hear this, now that he's older, I think sometimes he takes more risks than he should. But anyway, my mom was, she was funny. She was kind of, I don't know, opposites at times, but around the house, I can still hear her singing. She was singing all the time, but sometimes in the summer, she would just get really ornery. And like if a neighbor was outside, she'd grab like a bucket of water, and she would go over there and surprise him and splash him with the cold water. And then it'd be like a huge water fight was on in the whole neighborhood, right? So because they would come over and splash one of us. And so then we'd like, all right, that's it. So we'd grab something and go splash somebody else. She was always the instigator. And so we just have this big a water fight in the neighborhood between several houses. And it was so much fun. So yeah, she was probably the more of the risk taker. But Dad's one. He also he bought the motorcycles too. So I think they started off having a little motor scooter, a little Cushman scooter, and they'd ride around on that. And then he ended up buying a motorcycle, and then he bought a matching motorcycle for her. And then I don't know what happened to either one of those, and he ended up with a different bike. She ended up with a smaller one, and then she gave it to me. She stopped riding, I think, again, medical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of started our motorcycle stuff.
Do you have any fantastic motorcycle crashes?
I never did.
Your brother?
Not when we were young.
Uh-huh.
When he got older, I mean, quite a bit older. I think
Yeah.
in his 40s, he started got back into racing quad racers. And he went over a big jump, and the front end fell off of his quad racer.
Oh, that's a fun day.
It's like, this is not going to be good. But no, I never had any terrible things. The only thing I remember that ever happened bad to me was I was over there riding across the road one time, and instead of having my feet up on the foot pegs, I was just kind of dragging them on the ground. And unbeknownst to me, there were a bunch of hawthorn trees around there, and one of those long thorns went right in the end of my toe and I laid my bike over on the ground, screaming and hollering, like, "Oh my gosh, what was that?" Took my shoe off, and there was the end of a thorn, and I had to pull that thorn out of my toe, but it was in there like a good inch or so, and that was a terrible pain.
I bet it was.
But I never really got hurt. Part of it was probably I didn't mind riding fast, but I didn't like going over jumps and ramps too much.
Mm-hmm.
My brother, he liked that. I didn't like that kind of stuff. So I usually took it pretty easy. My mom always said, "You're never getting a street bike." I always said I wanted a street bike. She said, "You're never getting a street bike, and as long as you live in this house." And I moved out, and about 2 months later, I had a street bike. So, but I never had any trouble with that either. I'm not going to say I never rode it fast, because I did, but my favorite thing was just to kind of putt around and explore and see what there was to see, So, yeah, riding it fast I like to race, and so that became a big thing with the car, because we had the Chevelle, and so when I got to be driving age, Dad let me have the Chevelle. And it's funny, in school, I wasn't all that popular. I was kind of a loner mostly. And so nobody really knew me very well. And that was okay with me. I kind of stayed to myself. But then I started driving the Chevelle, and everybody started saying, "Hey, who's this guy with the Chevelle?" And so I'm sure it was my dad and my brother and I, all three of us together. We took the engine. Actually, I bought the engine from somebody else, and did some work to it and put it in there, and it was kind of fast, but it wasn't fast enough. And so I started piddling around with it and tinkering with it and working on it a lot, and it got to be faster and faster, and had a lot of fun with it. I learned something really useful during that time, though, is that it's the same way with like building a team. You can't just take the biggest and best of everything and put it all together. Everything has to work together right, And that's one thing I learned about working on the car, is that you could put the hugest carburetor and the biggest cam and the biggest whatever on it. It doesn't mean it's going to be fast. It's got to work together. And so I learned that about a team, whether that's sports or management or whatever. It's all got to work together. So anyway, I I got in a lot of trouble in that car, and did a lot of street racing, and but had a lot of fun. I'm surprised we lived through it all.
What does trouble mean?
Trouble.
You said you got a lot of
Oh boy.
trouble.
Let's see, what kind of trouble do I want to divulge here? One day after school, this is the worst. This is the worst thing. One day after school, I was leaving. We had a back drive coming out of the parking lot. I mean, I used to do burnouts in the parking lot and stuff all the time and whatever. But I was leaving one day, and I got out onto the street. I kind of laid into it a little bit before I got straightened back out, so it would fishtail a bit, kind of swerved a bit, fishtailed out down the street. And there was some friends in front of me, and they were like waving their hands, like, "No, don't do that." And they kept pointing behind me. I was like, "What?" And they kept pointing behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a police car behind me because they saw me do that. And so, you're supposed to pull over, but I didn't. And I just put it to the floor, and off I went. And for about the next 20 minutes, we had a chase through Independence. And I finally got away. But unknown to me, at some point or another, I had driven by the police chief's house at a high rate of speed. So I took the car and I hid it back behind a friend's house and waited for about 20 minutes. This girl, before school was out, she goes, "Hey, can you take me home? I missed the bus." I was like, "Sure." So she was along for the ride. Wasn't good for her. And so I eventually said, "I think it's probably safe now." And I was on the way home, and I thought I saw maybe what looked like a police car. I thought, no, I shouldn't have assumed. Next thing I know, I'm in a parking lot of what's Walmart now, is Woolworths then, and like 8 police cars swarmed around me. Oh man, this isn't good. And so I had a little bit of a rebellious streak in me. And so I got out of the car, and the police officer, told me to put my hands on the hood or whatever. My car was ugly. It needed painted. It was in bad shape. And he came up. He had this big old walkie-talkie. I mean, it was big. It was about the size of a brick, And he slams it down on the hood of my car. So I said, "Sir, I know my car doesn't look like much, but I really wish you wouldn't slam that down on the hood of my car." And I picked it up and offered it back to him, and he slammed it back down on the hood of the car again. And I guess I just stopped thinking, and I picked up the walkie-talkie and threw it across the parking lot. And then they picked me up and threw me onto the parking lot. And it kind of went downhill from there. So anyway, yeah, that was that was the trouble. So lost my license for a while. I think I got like 11 or 12 tickets that day. So
11 or 12 tickets.
Yeah,
I think
that's
I think that's the first time I've ever heard anyone getting that many tickets all in one day.
It was a lot. Maybe it was just 10, but it was a lot. And so I wasn't able to drive. Dad was kind of upset. I wasn't allowed to drive the car for a while. Well, they took my license away for a little bit. And so anyway, got the car back, went back to street racing again, And I thought about this a long time too. I had a friend, he was a grade school friend, and we was out cruising every night, me and my best friend. He had a Chevelle too, an old Chevelle. And we were always out cruising every night. And my friend Sam was out cruising one night, and he was leaving the Taco Bell. Some guys were street racing down the road. Is called Nolan Road there, the main road in Independence. Some guys were racing down Nolan Road. He'd pulled out. There was a car in front of him. He couldn't move, and they T-boned him at a high rate of speed, killed him, and the guy with him. And it still bothers me. And that didn't stop us. I mean, we might have stopped racing maybe a week, but next thing we know, we were out doing it again. Maybe we'd go different places, but we didn't stop. Like, man, what were we thinking? Why, if that wasn't enough to wake you up, what was it going to take? I guess eventually we grew up or whatever, but I always wondered why that wasn't enough to stop us from acting that way. I guess there's adrenaline. I don't know. But
did you stop street racing stuff when you connected with the guy who had the stock car down the road and you started racing with him?
No, that was just another avenue to enjoy. And a few years later, my brother ended up with a stock car, and my cousins ended up with stock cars. And so I never raced in a race, but I'd go out and what they call hot lap them, warm them up, and that kind of thing. Work with them. Years later, I ended up working at a high performance car parts place and hung around lots of people that were street racing or professional drag racers. They would come in, we sponsored them, and so racing was always just a part of everything. And it's funny, my brother still he doesn't have a car right now of anything to mention, but he usually does. And I haven't for years. I've just had, just car, something that I like, but nothing performance oriented really. I haven't had anything since I sold the Chevelle to him years ago. And then he restored it and sold it. I think I saw it come through Springfield just this last weekend. I think that looks like the Chevelle because it was Hugger Orange, and there could be others, but I know he sold it to somebody down this direction when we lived up in Nevada. So I think I saw it, and I miss it. I do, because we went everywhere in it. It was the go to school car. It was the go on vacation car. It was a dad go to work car. Go to the store car. It was everything. It was just the only car, and we took it to Colorado. Took it to see my grandpa down in the Boot Hill of Missouri. We took it everywhere. It was just a part of the family.
So are you now on the hunt for the Chevelle?
I know where a bunch of Chevelles are.
But you'd like that one.
I would like to have the same one, but they've gotten so crazy expensive. No, I'm not going to do that. I put my money in other areas. But I'd love to have an old Chevelle again, but I probably won't.
So let's go back for a little ways in your story.
Yeah.
You talked about you left high school, or after high school, you left your house. Where'd you go? What does the story of your life look like from there?
So from there, I mentioned Nevada. We went to Nevada a lot. And before that happened, my life ended.
Okay.
My best friend who had the other Chevelle, one weekend, it was the 4th of July weekend, we decided we was going to go down to Nevada. At this time, I'd been building engines for my cousins. My brother, my dad and I, and probably my brother a little bit, were building engines for my cousin's stock car down in Nevada. And so we had, quite a bunch of friends down there also. So my best friend and I, we went down to Nevada. His brother had just bought a brand new 1983 Camaro Z28, and it had like 300 miles on it. But he was over in Iraq in the war, and so he said, "Well, I have to ask my brother, but I want to see if we can take it to Nevada." So he said, "Yeah." I talked to him. He said, "Yeah, just be careful with it." So we went to Nevada, had a good time down there running around in the new Camaro and all that. And I was on the way back, and we got to Harrisonville, just outside of Harrisonville. And we was driving down the 2-lane. I think it was 291. And there was a little fireworks stand. We said, "Hey, just turn around and go back there." That's the last thing I remember, because he turned around, he came up a little hill in the highway, and I guess he turned left, and a pickup truck came over the hill and hit my side of the car. And I don't remember any of that. And the next thing that I remember, I was in an ambulance and people were looking down at me. And then after that, I was in a hospital in Independence. And the doctor said, we're going to put this tube in your lung, in your side. And that's all I remember. And several days later, I woke back up again. So that was apparently I'd gotten pinned in the seat. It crushed my pelvis, cracked several ribs, collapsed a lung. I was pinned in the car. I couldn't get out. They all thought I was dead. And the highway was closed down. And this nursing student just happened to show up. And so she come down to see what was going on, to come see me for some reason. And I was trying to get out of the car. So I guess what was happening was I tried to get out of the car. I couldn't because the seat had pinned me and it crushed around my hips. And then I'd just fall back again and just stop moving. And then I'd get up again and try. And she goes, no, he's not dead. He's alive. And so the ambulance showed up and they got me out of the car. And but more than once, from what I remember twice, they said in the ambulance I stopped breathing. And they had to do the CPR to bring me back again. So twice that happened. And then I got to Independence and the hospital over there. And I guess I stayed there. I think I was there for about a month in the hospital. I had to learn how to walk all over again and all that. And so that was a little detour in life. Like I said, I don't remember any of it. I still don't. I don't know what happened and all that. I just had to rely on what everybody told me. And so anyway, after I recovered from that, there was a settlement, which seemed like a lot of money at the time, insurance. And but it really wasn't that much. That's where I got the money to buy the motorcycle.
Okay.
So told mom and dad I was going to move to Nevada, and got a motorcycle. Bought me a little Datsun 240Z. It was my 8th Datsun in a line of Datsuns. I've had so many cars, a lot. And so I bought the Datsun and I bought the motorcycle, and I decided I was going to go to Nevada because they have an all-girl college. So it made sense to me, right?
Okay.
So I went to Nevada and never met a college girl. Never did meet a girl from college. I met my first wife, and so I never did meet a college girl because I met her, and so we got married a few years later, and had us a couple of great kids, and stayed in Nevada, and I didn't make a lot of good business decisions because I didn't know what I wanted to be. I had no idea. I'm not even sure I know now. But after several years, I've had about as many jobs as I've had cars.
Okay.
A lot. And so then I ended up getting a pretty good job, and we got us a house, and so things were going pretty good then. And I mentioned my kids. I've got a son named Josh and a daughter named Hannah, and now all of us live down in Springfield now. Well, he lives in Nixa, but we're in this area, and my ex-wife, she lives here in Springfield too. So we're all down here in Springfield now instead of Nevada. So anyway, so I don't know where we're going to go after that. So,
Well, if you're living in Nevada, you had a lot of different jobs.
yeah.
And then you find a way to end up in Springfield.
Yeah.
What's the connection between Springfield and Nevada? How do you end up in Springfield?
Well, man. So, she couldn't be my ex-wife, and there wasn't a divorce, and so we had to. We got divorced in, around 2000. Well, no, it was late 90s, early 2000s. I'm not one on details, so well, some details I'm really good at. Other ones I'm not. I can remember song lyrics really, really well, but some things I'm not so good at.
Do you have a favorite song lyric?
Oh my gosh, there's so many songs in my head. Every morning I wake up, I have a song in my head. It's usually a different song, but it's a different song. And I wake up, there's a song in my head every morning.
Remember the song that was there this morning?
Yeah. I've got this weird thing, this funny thing. Taylor and I got together when I first started helping with the audiovisual thing, and he told me he liked funny music. And so every week I send him a funny song. And sometimes that one gets stuck in my head. And this morning, the song was, I always evaluate throughout the week what song I'm going to send him. And this morning, the song was called Shut Up Your Face. It's just, yeah. So I never know what song it's going to be. It's always weird. It could be a classical song. It could be jazz. It could be rock. Who knows? I have no idea why or where it comes from. But anyway.
Are you musical? Do you play music?
I do. I hesitate to say that because I've always joked that I'm on the 40-year express method for guitar. I've been playing for probably 40 years. But I don't know if I'm through the first phase yet. I don't consider myself all that good. But yeah, I play my guitar. I say I play guitar, but I'm not a guitarist. Just like I can paint, but I'm not an artist, right? I write, but I'm not a writer. I'm really good at being mediocre at things. That's what I am. That's what I'm best at, being mediocre at something. And yeah, I don't remember where I was going now. But anyway, so we got divorced, and then I remarried a few years later. And as part of that, I was still living in Nevada. I worked at a window shop for a year, which I absolutely loved. I loved cutting glass. I got to do some stained glass work and refurbishing stained glass in churches, and I loved that. But it just didn't pay very well. So I got a job in Kansas City in an underground mine. It was 800 feet underground, driving a big 50-ton dump truck in the dark, in circles. But so I had to drive to Kansas City 5-6 times a week. I got a job there driving that truck, and then working the mine. Then I worked my way up, literally and physically, up into the plant where we made cement. And I worked in the plant crew, and then from there I moved over into the shipping department, and from the shipping I moved over into the warehouse, and from the warehouse I became the buyer, and from buyer I became purchasing manager. And when I became buyer, they said, "Hey, Darrin, we would like you to be the purchasing manager at the Tulsa facility." So I never wanted to live in Oklahoma, never wanted to go to Tulsa, but I ended up in Tulsa. So I was there for 7 or 8 years. And somewhere along the way, we did move from Nevada to Kansas City. I lived in Kansas City for a while, and then that's when I got promoted and told to leave. Told to leave Missouri and go back to Oklahoma, or down to Oklahoma. So I got down there, and so I was there for about 7 years, and got divorced again, and kept on working there. And gosh, what happened then? Then I decided I didn't want to be alone. And so I decided one day I was going to get online, and I was going to find me a different kind of girl, a girl not from the United States, from somewhere else. I want something different. And so I met this girl in Indonesia. I didn't even know where Indonesia was. She lived in Jakarta. I was like, well, Jakarta, where the heck is that? And that was a new experience for me. And so we started talking, and I know the question was, how did I get to Springfield? I'm working on it. And so we started talking and got along really well. And I thought, I think I want to go meet this girl. And we talked. We got to where we started talking, in person. I think we were using Skype at that point or something. And so I'd flown a little bit in the United States, but not very much. And so now I made the decision I was going to fly to go see her. And wow, that's a long ways.
Mm-hmm.
I flew from Tulsa, I think, to Dallas, and Dallas to LA. Did I go Dallas to LA? I can't remember. And then, no, it was to Dallas, and then from Dallas to Tokyo. And then I learned that they don't fly direct. They go with like the wind currents and stuff. So we went way up over Alaska, over part of Russia, and skirted along China, and then down in Tokyo. And so like 18 hours later, I was in Tokyo. And so then I had to get on another plane and fly another 6 hours to get over to Jakarta. Wow, that's a long ways. And so got to see her there, and things went really well, and flew back. And I thought, I think I'm going to go back and see her again. And so I did. And we're still together. That was 2018, I think. Not married yet. But so that's a separate story. So while I was there in Tulsa, at one point I decided I wanted to do something different. I couldn't do anything more there at the plant. I couldn't move into management any higher than being a purchasing manager. So I was talking to this guy who lived in Australia, and I met him on LinkedIn. And he had this business he was in the field of commercial excellence, and he had his own business in the cement industry. So I started talking with him. It seemed like we got along really well. So he decided to come over and see me. So he met me in Tulsa. We kind of discussed some things about business and whatever. And we decided to start our own business here. So I had my own consulting business. And that's when I left Tulsa and came to live in Springfield. I lived with my daughter for a little bit because I didn't want to buy a house yet, because I knew I was going to be traveling all over the United States. I was the only person in the United States at the time doing this particular thing in the cement industry. And so we had plans of doing all this stuff. So I moved to Springfield, lived with her for probably a year. But again, there were times like when my business partner said, "Hey, I'm going to come to the United States. I'll meet you in Las Vegas, and then we'll go see some different businesses. We'll end up in Indianapolis, and then I'll leave." So instead of flying, I had my little Mini Cooper, and I decided I'm going to drive to Las Vegas in my Mini Cooper. And so I did. And wow, the west part of America, people say there's overpopulation. They've never been out there. they don't know what's out there because there's nothing. But I found out I liked that. That was beautiful. I loved it out there. I could drive for 30, 40 minutes and never even see another car. And ran into a tumbleweed. But it was a long ways. I was just impressed because there was just so much of nothing. It's like, how can there be so much nothing? And so then we drove from Las Vegas through several different towns. I ended up in Indianapolis. He left, and I drove back to Springfield, and then worked on my business some. We had a couple of accounts that we were working with, and then another point we had a guy who was working on another part of our business. It was up in Redmond, Washington. I thought, hey, I've never been up there before. Let's drive the Mini Cooper up there. So I hopped in the Mini Cooper and drove it all the way up to Washington. Beautiful up there. I love it. My fiance kept saying, "You're spending money for nothing. You could just fly." I was like, "Yeah, but I've got the chance to do this, and it'd be a cool experience to remember." And so I did. I drove it up there, and then on the way back, a deer decided to step out in the road in front of me and sacrifice my Mini Cooper. And so anyway, and then, gosh, just a few months later, COVID came along, kind of killed the business. And people were like, "Well, we're not too worried about growing the business right now. We just kind of want it to stay alive." So I drove Uber for a little bit, just trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I'd always told myself if I ever got to a point in life where I didn't know what to do, I was just going to become a truck driver. So I did, and that's what I am now. So so I've been doing that about 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
all over the map.
Yeah.
Doing all kinds of stuff.
All over the map and all over the world, because with Trisha, she still lives in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and we're going through the fiance visa thing now. But along the way, we wanted to see one another, right? And since she couldn't come here, that immigration wouldn't let her here because they wasn't sure she would go back home. Ironic. Anyway, so we just decided we'd start meeting in other countries. So, so it still blows me away of the places that I've been, because I'm just Darrin from Kansas City. I'm not anybody. I'm just Darrin, so been to Indonesia twice, went to Singapore, been to Hong Kong 4 times. I think we're getting ready to go another time. Went to Barcelona, Spain, went to Belgium, went to the Netherlands, went to Istanbul, went to Athens, just got back from Portugal, went to Lisbon. So, yeah, the things I've seen that I never thought I'd see, it's incredible. I'm just really been so blessed, and I don't even know how to describe it. But it's been a blast. I've loved every minute of it, and spending it with her has made it even better. But it's it's been a crazy story.
Yeah. Can you talk for a little bit about your faith journey too?
Yeah, so my mom, she introduced us to church when we were really young. We went to a Southern Baptist church, and where Brother Harry Clifton was a preacher, and to me, he was God himself.
Hmm.
Listening to him, he was God. If he said it, then God said it too. It's the same thing. He
Hmm.
was just. They talked a lot. I knew that when I was a kid, and so mom got me and my brother going to church. Eventually, my dad started going too. He was a little hesitant for a bit. Next thing you know, he becomes a Sunday school teacher. And so I stayed in church, maybe not as consistently as I should have, because after I got the Chevelle and started running around doing all the
Hmm.
racing, you know, out late on Saturday nights, I didn't feel like getting up on Sunday morning. But I still drove the Chevelle to church at times, and but it stuck with me. I got saved when I was probably fifth, sixth grade, probably sixth grade.
Hmm.
So, and I've always had this thing: is like, is it better to get saved when you're really young like that because you don't understand the salvation, and you don't understand it, kind of like you might, like if you got older and you knew you lived wrong, right?
Hmm.
But I knew when I was young it's something I needed to do, and so I did. And I got baptized probably when I was in sixth grade. Um, so it always stuck with me for long. It stuck with me. Even there were times when I got off track and off on something else. But so I stayed in church there at the Baptist church, and then later on in Nevada, we weren't going to church, and then something about having kids. It's something about having kids. I've talked to so many people where when they had kids, they kind of felt drawn back to church.
Hmm.
And I think it's maybe so that the kids can experience the same things that they did when they were kids.
Hmm.
And so we decided we was going to start going to church, and we started going to Assembly of God Church there in Nevada. Well, I think we went to a non-denominational for a while. Then we went to Assembly of God Church, and I'm still friends with one of the guys that went there. He's actually my best friend, and while there, I became part of the youth ministry, and started working with the youth. I played drums on the during the service. I did some singing. I was an interim youth pastor for a little while. But a story I have to tell you. Some people think this is weird. Maybe we'll use it. Maybe we won't. Me and the guy I told you I was really good friends with. He's a preacher now, and he was a Sunday school teacher then, and he did some preaching at that time. We weren't getting along. We had something that I don't remember exactly what was going on. But one cool thing that we used to do was every Saturday night, me, him, and probably 4 or 5 other guys from the church, we'd get together on Saturday night. We'd go to the church and we'd pray in the sanctuary for the next day service. And so we would always do that. And so we were there in the church praying. I remember he was praying in another part of the church. I could hear him. And I was curled up in a little ball back in the corner on my knees praying. And I heard this voice. It was the loudest voice I've ever heard in my entire life. It was clear as like a bell on a winter's night, but it was the loudest thing in the world. And yet nobody else could hear it. And this voice just so loudly just said, "Arise." And I was kind of like the way you just looked at me, like, what? And so I thought to myself, arise? I mean, I knew who it was. I knew it was God's voice. His word says that he is our shepherd. We are his sheep and we recognize his voice. And so I knew who it was. There was no doubt in my mind. But arise and what? So that's what I said to myself. I thought, arise and what? And I stayed there, knelt, and then again I heard, "Arise." Like, well, okay, I guess I better arise. I'll figure it out later. So I stood up, and I was just kind of like flabbergasted, like, what is going on? And about that time, I looked where my friend was. He was up by the piano, and he had just walked out the door. I was like, I got to tell Randy what happened. And so I went out there, and he was just getting ready to leave. I said, Randy, you never guess what happened. And he goes, what did he say? I said, what do you mean? He goes, I was just up at, I'm almost ready to cry. He goes, I was just up at the piano praying that saying, God, if you want Darrin and I to talk, cause him to stand up. Well, he told me. And for years, I thought that was the only reason why God told me to stand up. If it was for that situation. But many times since then, I've realized there are lots of examples, lots of uses for that. Sometimes we doubt, right? We doubt that, is God really real? Is he really up there? And I go back to that, like, I know what I heard. There's no doubt. And I've also learned a lesson that, I say, why do we have to have faith? It's so frustrating. Why can't it just be like the Old Testament? Just tell us what we're supposed to do so we can go do it, right? That way I would never have to ask. But I know now from experience that as soon as he told me what to do, the very first thing I did was question him. I asked him why? What? Arise in what, right? So many ways I've been able to use that experience. Like, that's another lesson, So, yeah, like, well, just tell me what to do so I don't have to wonder. Like, it doesn't matter if he told me or not. I'd probably still question him, right? So, yeah, that was a powerful moment. After that, the church kind of had some problems after that, and I ended up getting out of church. That was about the time we had our divorce, and so I probably didn't go back to church until I lived back in Tulsa again, which was maybe 7 years later, something like that. And I started going to a United Methodist there the First United Methodist in Tulsa. Beautiful place. Gosh, I love that. It's beautiful inside. Just an old Gothic church, all stone, man. And so kind of got back into church then. Started volunteering a little bit there, and then when I quit working in Tulsa, moved to Springfield. Again, kind of didn't go back to church quite so often as I should have. But then I started going to Assembly of God down there in Ozark for a bit. And my son started going there. And then I moved out of my daughter's house. And I kind of decided I wanted something different in church. I think some of it was just some of my travels going around to some of these other countries, seeing some of the reverence that they have in their churches, right? You go in, and my fiance and I, we went to, I'll just call her Tricia from now on because that's her name. So I'll call her Tricia. We went to All Saints. It wasn't Episcopal. It was an Orthodox church in Jakarta, and they were just so full of reverence. It wasn't not just like here at this church, but churches in America where everybody goes in the sanctuary, hey, how's it going? Everybody's just all friendly and very casual. It wasn't that way, And I thought I kind of like that. I like that reverence, but I know I don't want to be Catholic. So I went down that road. I tried that once. And so I went to a church here in town that kind of had that feeling, but some of the stuff that they was teaching I didn't like, and so um, I was looking for a church, and then one day I said, "What's this deal with Schweitzer? Why is it called Schweitzer? I don't understand. That's weird." And so I came here, and I went to a modern service, and there was a cello on stage, and I was sitting right by the cello. And I was like, "Oh, I love cello. This is beautiful. The music was beautiful, and everybody seemed to be pretty happy." And then I saw there was a traditional service. I thought, well, I'm gonna try that. And man, I started crying. My first morning at the traditional service, hearing the music and seeing how happy everybody was. They were sincerely happy to be there, right? Everybody was so friendly and happy. And I started crying. I was like, God, thank you. Thank you for bringing me here. I found the place where I want to be. Uh, like I said, I've been to several churches. When I lived in Kansas City, I used to go to IHOP, the International House of Prayer. I enjoyed that a lot. But the music, especially there, I like that they have the global prayer room, right, where they play the music all the time. So, yeah, I loved it, and so I decided I wanted to be a member here, and now I'm doing the volunteer stuff.
All kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah, it is. So, and I feel like I've talked so much, you haven't had a chance to answer any questions, and maybe that's my way of stalling you. I don't know, but
No, that's okay.
But my daughter's, she's going to church now. My son is going to church, so that makes me happy. Got to see my daughter be baptized. Got to see my grandson be baptized. I've got a granddaughter here too. I don't get to see her very often, but yeah, it's just you got to see my son. My kids always have their own path, right? So my daughter, she kind of stayed mostly on the straight and narrow most of the time. It's kind of like the prodigal son kind of thing, right? She kind of stayed pretty much straight and narrow. He found a different path, right? And but he got to where he needs to be, And I'll tell this story, and we can use it if you want, because this one is the one that could make me cry. I'm hesitant to do it because my daughter, she's been kind of a rock for me, in her way. My son, at one point, I was afraid that I was going to see him die before I did. After the divorce, he and I weren't very close, and it was clear he was angry, right? I couldn't blame him. But somewhere along the way, he decided he started to hang around some people who were in the men's encounter, I think it was called here in Springfield. And so they kind of adopted him, and he went, and he had a really good experience there. And he said, "Hey, Dad, I'd like for you to come to this with me." And I wasn't able to come to the next one. So then I came, I said, "Hey, I'll be able to go to this one." This, like, it was the second one chronologically. And so we went, and it was really powerful. The first night I was done. We got there, and we all stayed in these rooms with like several beds. Like, you have like 8 beds in a room. And so some of the guys I knew that he had known, that invited him to come. And so we were in this room, and they said, "Hey, we're going to come in here, and we're going to pray for you guys, each one of you. When you sit in this chair, we're going to pray for you. And then we're going to wash your feet." I thought, well, okay. I've never had that done, but okay. So we're taking turns, a guy sitting in the chair, and the guys would come up and pray. And all along, if you remember, my son and I really had been kind of distant, trying to patch things up, always loved one another a ton, but difficulties, right? So it got to my time to sit in the chair and pray. or having them pray for me. And so I'm already going to start crying. So they got around me and started praying. And then when it was time for them to wash my feet, my son got on his knees in front of me and washed my feet. And I'm sure I cried more than I'm crying now. And I was so thankful because here I was afraid that my son was going to die and that our relationship was permanently, gone. And here he was humbling himself in front of me. And wow. It's just like such a weight of everything, just all the weight was gone. The heaviness between him and I had disappeared. And it really was like the prodigal son. It's like, oh God, go kill the fatted calf. I've got my son back. And so we had more experiences like that when we cried over the next day or two. And it really helped restore our relationship. And so my daughter, she was kind of like the son who had always been there. And then my son was the prodigal son, but in the end, we're all there together, And so, yeah, all I can say is God's just been really good to me. It's, like I said, being a little bit rebellious and troublemaker like I was when I was young and pulling me through death, dying, and all the things that God's just continues to. I used to say I found God again, but it's funny because he didn't go anywhere. He was there at the same place he always was. I just made my way back to where he was waiting for me, And my son learned that too. He was he's like, I said, God was there the whole time. He goes, yeah, I know. I was just running, So it's been good to see my daughter teaching her son the same. I know my granddaughter, she was saved too. I don't know what her Christian life is like right now, but teach them in the way they would go, and when they're older, they will return. So, got to have some faith in that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, Darrin, thank you so much for taking us to all those places in your life and in your story.
Yeah.
I generally like to close with a question, like,
sure.
Is there a word of wisdom or a thought of wisdom that you've lived by, that you found helpful, that you have lived into, that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, probably. Just a couple things. I won't let it go too long. One thing I always tried to teach my kids is the only thing constant is change. Mm-hmm. So just get used to change, right? Another thing is don't justify your behaviors on anything somebody else does. Don't say, well, he did that, so I'm going to do this. You don't do that. You do what you know is right to do. Mm-hmm. You do that. But the biggest thing I think that I've learned is be a pipe. Don't be a tub. And what I mean by that is some people, when they're shown grace in life, some people, they just collect that and they keep it to themselves. I would rather be a part of the plumbing where the grace comes in one end and I just let it pass on through to the next person. It touches me, but I let it pass on through to the next. Mm-hmm. I don't want to hold on to that grace. So as we're shown grace, also show that grace to others. I don't want to be the tub. I want to let that grace come through, and because it's such a good feeling when you get it, and so you just pass that on to the next person. So that's all the wisdom I have.
Great. Those are great words of wisdom. Thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, Darrin. Thanks for sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, a very big thank you to Darrin for sharing his story. In listening, I hope that you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold the really cool people who are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Swait Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Until next time, stay cool.